and welcome to a Know Your Startup edition of a VC Circle podcast. My name is Narinder Kapoor, and with me today is Sagar Sheth of goDutch, a Fintech startup. Sagar, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Narinder.
So, before we start, could you introduce us to goDutch itself? Tell us what the startup's about. Tell us what gap it's hoping to address. How you came about the idea.
Sure, yeah. So I think it goes back to our undergrad days, right? When Anirudh, Riaz, and I, the three of us, were actually living in the same wing in the same hostel on campus. And,
Mm-hmm.
all of us would go out on trips quite often. We would order in quite often. And we realized that people were always hesitant to, pay on behalf of the entire group because then the person who paid upfront had to basically, after the trip, go around knocking on hostel room doors, requesting friends to pay back. And you know how college students are like, right? So people
Yeah.
would be like, we'll pay later and we'll settle later and all of that. And that was quite irritating and inconvenient, right? But anyway, fast forward from there, as we graduated, started living with flatmates, we realized that most of our expenses were actually group expenses, right from home rent, furniture rental, ordering food and grocery, sharing OTT platform subscriptions, going out for movies, concerts, etc. So all of those, right? And managing them wasn't easy, as basically, first one person had to pay on behalf of the group, then manually, note down every expense on Splitwise or somewhere else, and then wait for a few days before people pay back, keep reminding people. Then people would eventually settle, right, via Paytm, Google Pay, etc. But it was a very broken process, a very long process. And our realization was that A, the process is broken, and B, while many apps exist for one-to-one payments, there doesn't really exist any one-stop shop, end-to-end dedicated solution for managing group expenses. And that's why we started goDutch, which is basically an end-to-end group expenses management app. I can obviously tell you more about goDutch if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. Can you give us an idea of how the process that's followed when somebody signs up for goDutch and when somebody wants to use it?
Sure, yeah. So there are basically two parts of the app. So one part of the product is somewhat similar to Splitwise in the sense that we allow users to seamlessly record expenses with their friends, individual or group. But additionally, we also allow them to settle those outstanding balances by basically initiating UPI payments to each other, which is something Splitwise doesn't allow at the moment. But it's really the other part of our product, which is a real innovation, right? Which is basically a first of its kind goDutch card. And that goDutch card basically enables instant group payments. And allow me to explain what I mean by that, right?
Sure.
The concept is basically, you know, instant group payments means that everyone basically is auto debited their own share and no one else pays on behalf of the entire group. An example could be if I'm living with two other flatmates and say I'm ordering grocery from Big Basket, I can basically use my goDutch card to transact on Big Basket. And the way it would work is before doing that transaction, I would come to the goDutch app and select the group with which I want to transact and decide how I want to split the payment, equal, unequal, so on and so forth. And then I basically use the goDutch card to transact on Big Basket. And if it was 1,000 rupees transaction, I'd selected the flatmates group and split equally. Then basically 333 will get deducted from all three flatmates. So basically, I didn't pay for the entire 1,000 rupees. All three of us ended paying our own share in real time at the point of transaction. So that basically eliminates the need to, ever keep track of that expense. So yeah, that's basically the whole innovation around the goDutch card. It's a virtual card right now, which we are issuing in partnership with CSB Bank. And
Mhm.
users can basically get the free virtual card instantly by signing up on the app.
Can you tell us then what are your goals for the company, at least in terms of what sort of I'm not sure the correct way of saying this, but what is the kind of market that you're hoping to address here?
Yeah, so goDutch is basically targeting millennials, right, in the age group of 18 to 28, right, from your college days to, your young working professional days when you're typically a bachelor. And that's a massive market, right? India is a large country. There are potentially 50 million such Indians only in tier one cities in that age group of, 18 to 28. And for us as a company, the goal is to basically become the default app that people think about when they're thinking of managing their group expenses, whether it be college students sharing canteen meals or flatmates sharing living expenses, friends going out on trips, office colleagues going out for drinks on a Friday evening. Basically, we want all of these groups to enjoy their group experiences and create amazing memories without, stressing over how do you manage the group expense part of it. So yeah, that's basically the company goal.
So what is the kind of traction you've seen so far? I mean, yeah, we've covered the fact that you've raised a significant amount of funding from a couple of marquee investors, but what is the kind of traction that goDutch itself has seen so far?
Sure, yeah. So it's been a little less than 2 months since launch, and we've
Hmm.
seen some very interesting traction driven primarily by, early adopters discovering us through social media and sharing it and making it viral. The beauty about this product is that there's a lot of inherent virality and network effects built into the nature of the product because it's basically a product, which you use with your own social network, right? Friends, flatmates, colleagues, etc. So I think we've seen over 10,000 users on the app within this period, generated without any marketing cost. And we are looking to basically scale up to a few million users over the course of the next 1 or 2 years.
Can you then tell us a little bit about what have been sort of I'm not sure if pain points is the correct phrase, but what have been some of the tougher hurdles for you and your co-founders to jump across while setting this up or even during these early operational stages?
Sure, yeah. So if I were to pinpoint, I don't think there's any, one or two very large roadblocks which have, touch wood, occurred for us yet. But I think there's this one constant uphill battle that we are fighting, right? Especially when, we are in the fintech space, within fintech, B2C payments. And that's this constant battle of establishing trust, right? And establishing that trust and credibility in the minds of multiple stakeholders, right? From your
Mhm.
end users to, banking partners, B2B payment companies we work with, all of them, right? And this is obviously difficult when, the other well-funded companies such as Paytm, PhonePe, Google Pay in the space do a lot of branding marketing to build that trust. And it's not easy to build, right? I mean, hopefully we'll be able to build it with a great product over time. But yeah, that's obviously one, constant uphill battle which any early stage startup in this space in particular would face.
Can you expand a little more on what you think of the fintech space currently as it stands? Because every month, pandemic or no pandemic, every month we here at VC Circle are covering at least a couple of fintech startups that raise funding, whether it's a startup that's seeking to make education financing easier, whether it's a startup like yours that's seeking to invent a whole new category. Can you give me your take on where you think the fintech industry currently stands?
Sure, yeah. So I think, forget fintech, right? If you take a step back and think about financial services industry, I think
Sure.
over the last couple of decades, it's mostly been dominated by these large banks, right, which have tried to do everything, right, from lending to insurance to payments. Now it's in the last, 4 to 5 years where specialists have sort of started to emerge, and all of these are obviously given they're coming up in this age of technology and internet and this crazy smartphone penetration. There's this whole large market access that has been developed for them, and they're enabling it through technology, right? So I think this is basically a great time for any fintech startup to emerge, just because of the distribution that you can achieve in a very quick way and the technology backbone with which you can set it up. Basically, create like a specialist company, like we are doing something in the space of payments for millennials. There are similar other companies emerging in very specific spaces. Could be at tech lending. It could be insurance for micro insurance. Basically, there could be many other different themes emerging. But I think basically it's the right time in the ecosystem to start a fintech company, and that's why we are seeing a lot of interesting fintech companies emerging. And also, I think the other point is in terms of the larger scale of things, fintech penetration or financial services penetration in India has been very low, right? Insurance penetration is, single digit. Payments penetration, digital payments didn't exist for the longest time. So it's sort of a coming of time scenario as well in terms of the overall country.
You also mentioned, I want to put that in contrast because you also mentioned that building trust, credibility, and even establishing your presence in the market can be a bit dicey because you have established players like Google Pay, Paytm, and your phone pays of the world. Do you think they will act as a hindrance to other fintech startups or to all early stage startups, regardless of the sector they're in, or do you feel that there is a sort of compromise that can be reached?
Yeah, so I think in fintech, what's really important other than trust, which is I think number one, is basically the product experience, right? If basically you are able to give the right customer experience in terms of lending, it can be, very quick dispersal of loans. In terms of payments, it could be, very high percentage of successful transactions. If you're able to provide that product experience, that user experience, then I think that trumps everything else, right? Whether the company you're competing with is a large one
Mhm.
or if it's a small one. So I think if small companies are able to provide that customer delight, then there is a very good chance that they could create niches for themselves and emerge strong versus traditional banks or these large well-funded startups with large parent companies.
Then in that case, I want to ask you: is there a sense of idealism that you say fintech startups, or even you forget fintech startups? Is there a sense of idealism that you follow in this context and in the context of goDutch itself? Or I mean, and if that's the case, how do you sort of maintain it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I think it's very important in this world to be very practical. So I would call myself more a practicalist, if that's even a word, than a typical idealist. I think for me, my worldview tends to keep evolving based on what I see around me, and
Mhm.
based on that, my approach to solving every problem also keeps evolving. And I think this is very important when you're a startup founder, right? Strong opinions, but loosely held, basically keep adapting and evolving with what you see around you. Yeah.
So, and then finally, what is the sort of work-life balance that you and your co-founders follow? I mean, I'm sure that there may be a lot of other people joining your team right now, but is there a sort of work culture that you're looking to instill right from the get-go? Is there something that all three or four of you do? I mean, can you give us an idea about that?
Sure, yeah. So as an early stage founder, right, or even as an early team member at the startup, it's obviously very difficult to, find time for your personal life because there are always 100 different things you're constantly thinking about. But at the same time, it is important to maintain work-life balance, right? Because the startup journey is a marathon. It's, constantly sprinting will only burn you out. No startup is an overnight success. There's no magical moment, which really makes that startup successful. You need to constantly keep at it right day in, day out. And that's the only way to success. So for us, I think we do, keep trying to take breaks. We do keep trying to have informal events between the founders, informal conversations between the founders, as well as with the early core team to basically, keep ourselves refreshed and always be at our peak performance, not just in the short run, but also in the long run, right?
Well, then, on that note, it's been great talking to you, Sagar. Thanks so much for taking the time out.
Thanks, Narinder, for having me. It was a pleasure to be on this
Yeah,
podcast.
same. Thanks so much. Take care.